You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
Welcome back to another episode of Inside the Village with Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Welcome back for another exciting episode of the program.
Thank you, Scott. Good to see you.
Yes, great to be here. I'm excited. I'm excited about our guest. I'm excited to be back in the studio with Derek and yourself.
You seem less angry. Are you still angry?
Are you talking about the Air Canada thing?
Yeah, the only thing you've been talking about for 3 weeks.
Well, you know what? Yes. Okay, so there's an update. Last week I filled you in on the entire situation. This past weekend, get an email from them telling me, and I'll give you the Coles Notes version, that the flight cancellation was out of their control. They weren't responsible. However, as a goodwill gesture, they were going to give us each a $300 flight credit. Now, the laundry list of restrictions that goes with this flight credit, incredible.
You can only fly like Tuesday evening?
You know what? You probably would have had to have spent $1,000 just to use the $300 flight credit. Yeah. So I politely declined, emailed them back. Not as angry as I was last week. It's now, I think it's become a bit of a cat and mouse game, right?
Yeah.
To see where this thing goes. Here's my argument, though, and you know, be honest. Tell me if I'm out to lunch on this. This all stems from the de-icing truck in Sault Ste. Marie, which broke down the day that we were to return back to the Sault from Toronto. Mm-hmm. That had no bearing, in my opinion, of Air Canada getting me from Toronto to Sault Ste. Marie. My perspective is they did not want that aircraft to sit on the tarmac for what turned out to be, I believe, 2 days, not generating any revenue.
But didn't the plane that was going to take you back to the Sault have to come from the Sault to Toronto to pick you up?
The plane was there.
In the Sault?
No, the plane was in Toronto. Oh. They didn't want the plane to go to the Sault, only to have to sit there knowing that they couldn't de-ice it.
Because of the de-icing machine.
Because the de-icing truck had broken down.
You're doing some good investigating here. Where did you find out about the de-icing?
You taught me well. I found a story on SiouxToday.com written by one James Hopkin, which gave me a lot of backgrounds. Now, some further digging, it turns out that the actual de-icing truck is owned by Air Canada, but they shop it out to a third party called Executive Aviation, which actually does the de-icing. Man. So if I own a de-icing truck, and I know that's my only way in and out for not only my airline, but other partner airlines who fly into that airport, would you not have a plan B?
You'd think you'd have a plan B, but I'm more concerned. Are you doing any other work around here besides researching? Let James do the journalism, and you should be doing some other work.
Don't tell the boss. So I don't know if I'm just just throwing stuff into the wind here, but I'd love some listener feedback. Good chance to use our new email address. itv@villagemedia.ca.
I thought you were going to say itv@aircanada.com.
Yeah, that's right. No, I've got a different email address for them. Be curious to know what people think.
You know, it's at the point, sometimes when you deal with these, I don't know all the ins and outs, but when you deal with sometimes a company and you're not getting the answers you want, it becomes a point of pride to just keep going at it, right? You just never give up. I know, I have issues with an appliance before. Sometimes it would take 2 years to get even just a small refund back, but you wouldn't give up on that because it was a point of pride.
Absolutely. And my wife may attest to this. I can be a little stubborn. I know you don't believe that.
God. That's shocking.
It's very shocking. Time will tell. There will be another update, I'm sure. Oh, here's the kicker too. When they say they're going to email you within 30 days, guaranteed within 30 days, it was day 42 that we got the email.
We should ask for someone from Air Canada to come on the show. Have a one-on-one with you, little therapy session.
Here's what I'd say. Good luck trying to get a hold of anyone. Mm-hmm. It'll never happen.
All right.
Because apparently that department has no email and no phones.
Unlike us.
Unlike us.
All right.
itv@villagemedia.ca. Would love to know what the audience thinks about this Air Canada situation. Okay, first word to Frisco. It is budget time in cities across the province of Ontario. Obviously, inflation is going to play a key role as municipalities put together their operating budgets for 2023 and beyond.
It's interesting. Journalism kind of has a yearly cycle. Local journalism especially, we cover the things that typically come up, elections, and budgets are one of those things. Every year, this time of year, they're talking about the budgets. And I think it's fair to say that most of the time people pay attention to the budget process and they see the headline saying how much their levy hike is going to be, and they move along. But I think there's a lot more people paying attention in communities. At least that's the feeling I get, right? Because cities are starting to throw out some pretty high potential numbers for the property tax hike to be this year, really sort of selling the idea that we're dealing with inflation just like your household is, and expenses are unlike we've ever seen before, and we're going to deal with some pretty tough decisions on what to pay for and what not to pay for. I know our journalists in all our communities will be watching this closely and getting into the weeds of what the numbers will be.
And cities operate, I'm guessing, no differently than you or I or Derek would operate our households. There's only so much money coming in. Money's got to go out, and you get to a point where you need to pick and choose. What bills get paid.
And that's the reality. You have to make some tough decisions, right? And really, the municipalities are kind of the nuts and bolts of what we spend money on, right? We have to make sure that the roads work. We have to make sure that, city parks are kept up. And then kind of beyond that, it's up in the air, right? So maybe the city might want to, have something special in the wing, something they're building or something they're looking to do. And maybe this will be the year when they say, we're going to put that on hold, because just maintaining and doing the usual things are costing a lot more money than it had in the past. So something to watch definitely closely in all our markets.
And speaking of money, apparently George Peary in Timmins spares no expense when it comes to throwing a victory party. That guy knows how to throw it down.
For sure. We got to be fair, I guess, but this is a great story. Maya Hoggett, our editor in Timmins, who does a fantastic job covering Timmins for us, she had dug into some Elections Ontario figures that had recently come out on all the candidates. The election has long finished, but the numbers are still being crunched on how much candidates raised and how much they spent. And as she looked through each line item, as great journalists do, she noticed that George Peary's victory party was way more than most, like in the $23,000 range, right? So, of course, here he is the former longtime mayor he was a one-term mayor, the former one-term mayor in Timmins, unseats in a long-time incumbent in the provincial election, and they have lots to celebrate. And so she reached out to them. And she got a pretty detailed answer about how they actually threw two parties, one on the night of the election and one afterward to thank all the volunteers. And it's just interesting. Well, I guess what it says to me, what was great, two things. One, she, of course, reached out to the rest of us and said, hey, guys, this is something that I did in Timmins. You might want to look at your own MPP's numbers and see what you come up with. And B, it just reminds us of what great local journalists do, right? That they are looking at things that maybe the average Joe is not looking at, right? And seeing if there's something there to be pursued a little further. And it was just a great example of that. And I feel like we do that kind of work every day on all our sites. Absolutely.
The first word to Frisco. Okay, today's guest, a very special individual hailing from the city of Guelph. Noah Irvine is his name. And Noah's had a tough go since pretty much since birth. And he's become a real champion of mental health in our country and has gone to extraordinary lengths to have a voice and to have a voice heard on behalf of so many people in this country.
A very inspiring guy. He has a book out that came out last year. And what's really interesting is his story has a really strong connection to Village Media. So we're going to get into that some more.
All right. Noah Irvine joins us next when Inside the Village returns right after this.
From newsmakers to celebrities to other prominent guests, you'll find them all on Village Media's new interview series, Up Close and Personal. Join host Scott Sexsmith as he goes one-on-one with well-known Canadians to hear their story. Up Close and Personal. Look for it on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village with Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Very pleased to be joined on the program now by Noah Irvine from Guelph. Noah, welcome to Inside the Village. It's great to have you with us today.
Good to be here.
Noah, you have what many would call a very unconventional story. You've faced things that nobody in their lifetime should have to. Maybe we could just start at the beginning and you could paint the picture and tell us what happened and where things have led you to where you are today.
Well, I'll try to be as concise as possible. I was 5 years old. My mother, Leslie, who had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, was 24 years of age, and she took her life in the walls of a psychiatric hospital in the province of Ontario. Like I had said, I was 5 years old. I had not yet started senior kindergarten when I lost my mother. Prior to that, she, through the course of her mental illness, had struggled greatly, had been in and out of psychiatric hospitals in the province many a times. Beyond that, she unfortunately faced domestic violence, to which I was privy to watching at times. Fast forwarding from her death, I also then lost my father when I was the age of 15, and he was 40. My dad had been released from a drug and alcohol treatment facility in the city of Toronto a day before his death. So that's the condensed version of the story. Obviously, it's a heavy story, as you've indicated, but like I said to you before we started, I'm still here, still kicking, and you can still be positive through all of this.
Yeah, no, I want to ask you only because I've read your book, and I know in the 5 short years that you had your mom in your life, you had a very special relationship and bond. What can you tell us about Mom?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that at the age of 23, which I'll be turning in 2 weeks, there's very little I actually remember of her. But from what I understand, when she was mentally fit and present and her illness was at bay, I was loved and cared for. But unfortunately, time was not on our side. And at this particular moment in my life, I have very little memories of her.
What you discovered some things in your childhood and in your teen years about the way Canada deals with mental health and addictions. You saw how the system worked firsthand. Obviously, it motivated you enough to write to book about it, but even before that, to sort of try to make some change from within. What did you try to do, Noah? What motivated you to do what you did?
After my dad died, and after I had been going to cemeteries for a decade prior to his death, I decided to write and compose letters to anybody who I could write, from federal members of parliament, including the Prime Minister, to members of the Legislative Assembly in Ontario. But beyond that, it went national, and I decided to write more and more and more, primarily asking leadership at all levels of government, appointed and elected, whether it be provincial, federal, or municipal, to take concerted action on this file. My mom and dad are unfortunately not the only two who have died due to mental illness. And as that is the case, it would be a shame if I allowed their stories to fall on deaf ears, and to not tell their stories, and to not inform government that the policy decisions that you take today have impacts on Canadians. And my mom and dad were Canadians, and their lives mattered. And as such, I made sure that I told government just how much their lives mattered, and how much their deaths should matter, in that we should no longer be losing people like mom and dad to mental health and addictions in this country.
So as your book lays out, in grade 11, you actually wrote a letter to every sitting MP at the time. Did you have any response at the beginning? Did people get back to you?
The wheels of government are slow, and the responses themselves were slow. And one of the unfortunate parts of this was the idea of not my constituent, not my problem. If this was a constituent related issue, I would have kept it local. This isn't just a single geographic issue. This is an issue that encompasses every part of the country, and I detail that in the book. When you're driving down a country lane and you see a farmhouse and a light's on in that farmhouse, they're dealing with the same issues we're dealing with in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal. In the high Arctic, they're dealing with the exact same issue. We have systemic policy failure at every level, regardless of party, and I was committed at that time, and still am, to ensuring that we talk about this and we try to propel the policy decisions going forward.
Noah, you mentioned the Prime Minister, and we'll talk about the conversation that you had with him in a moment. Do you know, all told, how many letters you wrote?
Yeah, in the book I cite 1,500, but I think looking at that number now, I'm probably upwards of 1,800 or more. So a lot. I've cut a few trees down to do this, and but I have kept Canada Post employed based on sending them through snail mail. So I've done my civic duty to Canada Post. So that's a few letters, to say the least.
And as sometimes happens with a story, right, Noah, things took a turn when you had an interaction with the journalist. In this case, Ken Armstrong of Village Media. At the time was working at Guelph Today. He's now at Sioux Today. Tell us about that, how you met Ken and what happened.
Yeah, I was up in Ottawa. My granddad had suggested he was in a ministerial office in Saskatchewan, so he kind of knew, doing media releases and so forth, how this all kind of works. And he had said that, let's get the media involved. Let's see if Guelph Today will pick this up. And he took down a copy of that first letter and a bit of a news release, and it landed on Ken's desk, and it was about 5 or so in the evening, and Ken looked at it and said, I got to do something with this today. So he called me, and I was in Ottawa, like I said. We had a chat. I had no idea how far it would go. I had waited 6 months for responses prior to Ken writing his story. And within 12 hours, I was inside the Prime Minister's office meeting with senior members of the Prime Minister's staff. So it just proves how fast journalism can propel this forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your book, Noah, that you were in the Prime Minister's office. And there's also an element of fear on their behalf that they weren't quite sure what you were going to say in some upcoming interviews. Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, it's funny how fast government gets worried when they don't know what you're going to say, especially as
it's the only time they move quickly.
There is some truth to that. No, I was at lunch, and they had tried to get both Jane Philpott to speak with me prior to going in front of Global News. And they had also tried to get one of those prime ministerial office workers to get a hold of me so that he could say, we're being proactive on this. And I could then go to the media and say, they're being proactive. I'm meeting with them. So there was some real movement. I don't think my phone's ever rang that much through the course of an hour-long lunch.
So fast forward to, I know that the PMO had tried to set something up, and there were some scheduling conflicts, and it got canceled a few times. But finally, the phone did ring, and Prime Minister Trudeau was on the other end. Can you walk us through that conversation?
Absolutely. It's funny when you're called by the Prime Minister's office, they ask if you can take the call, like the switchboard asks you. And I don't know how many Canadians have said, actually, I can't take the call right now. I'm going through a tunnel. But that call comes in, and I had 2 points that I wanted to discuss with him. I had noticed a lack of cabinet cohesion early on with this. Some cabinet ministers were quite supportive of what I was asking for and saying. Others were, I would characterize it, almost derelict of their responsibility at the cabinet table on this. And I noted that to the Prime Minister, but I also noted, the federal government has to take a broader role to this. Throughout history in this country, the feds have just written checks, and checks are really nice, but leadership is important as well. And if you're going to give out X number of dollars, you have to ensure there is some accountability and leadership. This is an area of healthcare that has very little accountability. So I talked to him about that. And it was interesting, the conversation lasted about 20 to 30 minutes there. And at 17 and being maybe a little bit more blunt, because of my learning disability, I had said to the Prime Minister, well, that's all I have to say. I know you're a busy guy, so I guess I'll let you go. And that was kind of it. So I don't know if I would have ended it as quickly as I did now, but we did have some good discussions, and I had been hopeful after speaking with him.
Great. Let's backtrack a minute because I don't think a lot of people understand sort of how a news story can kind of take off the way this one did. I'm looking at I'm looking at this story when it came out in August 2017. The headline was "Teen who lost both parents to mental health issues mailed letters to all 338 MPs. Only 40 responded." The post went up at like 9:00 at night, right? That night.
Yeah.
And looking at it now, it's been shared out more than 12,000 times on Facebook, this piece.
Wow.
So what happened, Noah? The piece went up at 9:00. What happened? Did the phone just start beeping and people just started getting back to you?
Yeah, it's funny. I went to bed and woke up at about 7:30, and I had a text from my member of parliament who said the Prime Minister's office wants to speak with you. And from that point on, everything just kind of kept going. Huffington Post was on me pretty quick that following day, I think the 23rd. global news. They were immediate. Mark Carcassole in Toronto was trying to get their Ottawa team to meet with me and trying to set something up there. And then I had calls from, I know I'm missing a ton of radio. 1010, News Talk 1010, I believe, covered me. That's where I had said that if Andrew Scheer or Patrick Brown, who was the leader of the provincial Tories, were listening, I would appreciate a response to my letter. I did get a response after I said that, so somebody was listening, which kind of, is interesting as now as a political science student, because you realize just how just the team that they have of researchers listening and looking. And I think that's the interesting part. The media can change a story very, very quickly. And you're right, within 12 hours, they can change it like that. I'd been waiting 6 months, and within 12 hours, my entire world changed. From one story.
And Noah, sorry, Frisco, Mark at Global went to extraordinary lengths to track you down. I think he called every Irvine and Guelph.
He did.
Ended up speaking to your granddad, called your high school. I mean, he was leaving no stone unturned.
He talked to my 90-year-old at the time great aunt, who then gave him my high school. He then called the high school. High school wouldn't give them information. They called my granddad. My granddad called him back, and then he eventually got my number. So it was quite a bit of phone tag there.
That's amazing. And as I've been a journalist for a long time, it's hard to believe, but we often cover things that are awful, right? And a large part of the story you tell in your book has some very difficult things to get through. But it's times like this when we shine a light on somebody who's doing something important, who's doing something that makes a difference, and it's wonderful to kind of see it take off like that. And there's a point where you're proud of it. And I know Ken, we're colleagues, and I know he's proud of this story. It's something that he brought to light, and it took off the way it did, and it's led to this wonderful book that you've written, and it's led to discussions, and I'm assuming it's led to a lifelong commitment to this cause for you, right? I mean, well, what's your future, Noah? What are you trying to get out of what you went through when you were 17?
I've often thought about this, and it's probably something that most 23-year-olds don't really think about. But what's your purpose here? Is kind of something I've often thought of. What is the point of all of this? What is the point of loss? What is the point of me being here? Most young people in this country will never be orphans. I am. It's a matter of what you do with it. And I think in everything that I have tried to do is not only to share my mom and dad's names, to make sure that they do not die twice. Once when they're put in the ground, the other when their names are said the last time, but to ensure that we remind ourselves that they're not the only two that have died and are dying to this. And I think that it's a cause that I've really attempted to shed light on, to remain as positive as I can, while also ensuring that, we keep holding government accountable, so that my mom and dad are the catalyst to change something here, because something's got to change. I shouldn't be standing at cemeteries at 23. That's not how the world is supposed to work. But it's my world, and I'm trying to ignite some discussion and change around that.
You mentioned change, Noah, and in your book, you made a comment that at that time, MPs and elected government officials in general don't know enough about mental health, and certainly about mental health advocacy. Has it gotten any better?
It's an interesting question. Has it gotten better? I'd like to say yes, but also I'm a bit of a realist, so probably not in every case. One of the things I said to the Prime Minister's staff was that it's really easy for an MP to call the police and arrest somebody who's mentally ill. It's much harder to talk to that individual and hear their story. We can arrest our way we can only arrest our way so far through this. And I think that's an issue that continues, where we are trying to arrest our way out of this. And I think a lot of MPs, it's very easy to pick that phone up and call the cops when somebody's being belligerent in front of your constituency office. It's a lot harder to ask that person, how'd you get here? Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think that we are more compassionate and understanding. I really would. But there is a part of me maybe it's a jaded part that recognizes we might not be there yet.
Is that the first step? Because obviously, since it's been almost 6 years since your story first came to light, I think there's a lot more awareness over mental health issues than there were maybe 6 years ago, which is a positive thing. But we obviously have a long way to go. What's the next big step? Is it for us to be more compassionate, to be more understanding? What do we need to do to sort of start this process, Noah?
Well, I think compassion is obviously an enormous part of this. But fundamentally, I think it's government changing their tune and recognizing that mental health and addictions has to be a co-equal part of healthcare. I'm not a guy that really likes to spout statistics off because I think it does a disservice. I note that in my book many times. We're spending in Ontario about $74 billion on healthcare overall. We're doing about $2 billion or so, roughly. Somebody can fact check this, but about $2 to $3 billion on mental health and addictions care. We're spending $7 billion on COVID response. So it's still a chronically underfunded part of healthcare, and yet we're told that it needs to be a co-equal part of this. You can't have health without mental health, but it's not funded to the same degree. So I think on top of being that compassionate society, it's a matter of actually putting our Bell Let's Talk Day. It's actually making sure that we don't just talk about it one day, we talk about it all the time, and we fund it all the time. We can't just patchwork fund our way out of this. We've got to commit to it.
Noah, I know you mentioned you're a political science student at University of Guelph. I'm curious, and sitting here listening to you speak so eloquently, is politics in your future at all, do you think? Is it something that you would pursue so that you can fight a greater fight and keep this going?
Probably not. One of the issues that I encountered is we are so divided as a country. We're so partisan. We're so divided. We refuse to talk to one another. And I think that is an environment that I want nothing to do with. I'm a guy that likes to talk to New Democrats, Greens, Liberals, Conservatives, anybody you can think of. I like to talk to them. I've talked to a lot of people across the country, from the Saskatchewan Party and beyond. So, there's a lot of individuals I've conversed with, the Bloc Québécois, and in politics, I think now we've moved so far away from listening to each other that it's an area of government and life that I just don't want any part of. If we can't actually have a conversation, there's no reason for me to be there to add to that.
What a novel concept, Frisco? Yeah. Putting political party lines aside and just communicating with one another for the greater good. Mm-hmm. Sounds to me like you would do okay. Noah. Learning to Live is the book. It's a wonderful read, From the Loss of My Parents to Mental Health Advocate. Where can people get a copy?
So my website, learningtolivebook.ca, I think Mike has a link there. But that's the primary place to get it. It goes into a scholarship for other kids who've lost a parent or both at my former high school. It's dedicated to my mom and my father. My mom went to my former high school, and I'm able to give back to a lot of kids that deserve far better than they got. And hopefully a small bit of financial support for their post-secondary education is going to provide them a little bit of an understanding that people do care about them and what they've gone through, and just the matter, just the fact of the matter that they've made it. That's what I want to reward. You've made it. You've overcome some odds that most will never, and giving back to them through the proceeds of the book is hugely important to me.
Well said, Noah. Again, it's a wonderful read. Learning to Live. We encourage everybody to get a copy. Noah, you're fighting a good fight. You've done so much more than so many others could have, with a lot more power. So good on you. Thanks for joining us. Happy early birthday. And
thank you.
Let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to wrap here on Inside the Village with Frisco. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Michael Friscolanti, I should get that straight, editor-in-chief. He's a big deal.
That's what they say.
Big deal, Noah. He was wonderful. What a great guy.
You know what I couldn't help but think is, this is mean to say, but there's oftentimes people write books, right? And they are quasi-celebrities or somebody who has a story to tell that's already in the public limelight, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of books, or not all books, but a lot of books are like that.
Yeah.
And then you listen to a guy like Noah, who was what you can say definitely not in the limelight. Like, he was definitely not in the spotlight.
Yep.
He was thrust there because of a great news story that kind of put him in the limelight, and he goes on to write this book that is very powerful, and the people need to read. These are the kind of stories people need to understand. So that's what struck me. It's just how well spoken he was, and just the idea that he's not out here pushing his own fame or pushing a story that's going to sell a bunch of books. He's telling this story because he feels like it's important for the public to know that people go through things like this.
And I'm sure he does want to sell a lot of books, only so that he can boost the value of that scholarship at his high school, which speaks to the kind of person that he is. And as I sat here listening to him, I thought, man, what a shame that this guy doesn't want to go into politics, because that's the kind of person who could make a difference, dig their heels in, and make some positive change.
Well, it's interesting. He's a young guy, right? I keep thinking 23 and so smart, so well spoken, and you never know. Things could change, and that could end up where he is down the road. You never know.
You never know. Great guest with a very, very powerful story. Noah Irvine, and again, Learning to Live is the book, and you can get it online. Great read. Okay, speaking of great things, we've got some great things coming up in the next few weeks here on Inside the Village, but we cannot divulge anything as of yet.
We must keep it inside the village.
We will keep it. We absolutely will keep it inside the village. InsideTheVillage.ca, you can find all back episodes across the Village Media Network, and of course, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And at any time, any questions, comments, suggestions, reach out to Derek, Frisco, or myself at itv@villagemedia.ca. For Derek Turner, executive producer here at Inside the Village, Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Talk to you next week.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.